What's happening, folks? Back with another reaction, back with some System of a Down. Not for the first time on the channel, as I did react to Toxicity a couple years ago, but for only the second time. And in this case, we're going to listen to a track from their 2005 album, Mesmerize, which, as you can see, I do have the case for, and the booklet is up on my wall, but somehow I lost the disc in recent years. I don't know why that happened or where it went, but it is therefore very fortuitous that great friend of the channel, Kim, sent me this track, B.Y.O.B, Bring Your Own Bombs, obviously playing on the party-related acronym, Bring Your Own Beer. But yes, Kim sent me a number of tunes relating to issues both more immediate and longer arc, and in this case I would argue it is somewhat related to both short and long time scales. But yes, Bring Your Own Bombs, this song speaks to the, let's say, human disposition to solve geopolitical problems with military violence. It is indicative of the way people who suffer the consequences and the bombardment of that violence often have little, if anything, to do with governmental decisions, and the people enacting that military warfare are themselves often pawns in larger forces and are sent in these conflicts often to die for causes that are at best ethically questionable. It suggests that oftentimes warfare is engaged in for economic gain or indeed exploitation, and that unfolds in multiple phases, whether taking natural resources after conquering lands in an imperialist type of manner, but also in a corporatist way where after warfare is officially declared over, there's a rebuilding process, and sometimes corporations that maybe lobbied for warfare to begin with then make money off of rebuilding and do so in a way that is not always reflective of the best interest of those who live through the warfare or the local situations. So yes, it attacks the idea of the way humans on a national and indeed international level solve problems by exploitation, violence, theft, graft, and brutality. And it is, of course, a condemnation of, let's say, modern nation states in general, maybe some nation states in particular, but also I think human nature, which happens to exist now in the 20th and 21st centuries, with technological abilities that imperil everyone. And again, in many cases, most of the people dying are not those pulling the levers and ordering airstrikes and so on. So yes, it is a critique, a scathing indictment of some of the worst things that humans get up to for some of the most transparently dubious and or unethical reasons. I'll stop pontificating now. Let's listen to the song. This is System of a Down, B.Y.O.B, which I think in this case translates to, or stands for, Bring Your Own Bombs, and it's from the 2005 album Mesmerize.
Victorious kneel, brand new spanking deal. Marching forward, infiltrating and hypnotic computers. You depend on our protection, yet you feed us lies from the tablecloth. La 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 la. Everybody's going to the party, have a real good time. Dancing in the desert, blowing up the sunshine. Kneeling roses disappearing into Moses' drive out, breaking into part, not stealing our intentions. Anger sitting gripped in oil, crying glitter. And into obsolescence, still you feed us lies from the tablecloth. to the party, have a real good time. Dancing in the desert, blowing up the sunshine. Everybody's going to the party, have a real good time.
The vocals.
Dancing in the desert, blowing up the sunshine. Blast off! It's party time! And we don't live in a fascist nation! Blast off! It's party time! And where the fuck are you? Where the fuck are you? Where the fuck are you? Why don't friends fight the war? Why do you always send the war? Why don't friends fight the war? Why do you always send 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 the war? Healing process disappearing into Moses' dry mouth, breaking into for not stealing our intentions. Anger sitting dripped in oil, crying freedom. And the through of salvation, still you feed us lies from the tablecloth. Everybody's going to the party, have a real good time. Dancing in the desert, blowing up the sunshine. Everybody's going to the party, have a real good time. Dancing in the desert, blowing up the sun. Where the fuck are you? Where the fuck are you? Why don't presidents fight the war? Why do we always send the poor? Why don't presidents fight the war? Why do we always send the poor? Why do we always send the poor? Why do we always send the poor? Why do they always send the poor? Why do they always send the poor? Why do they always send the poor? They always send the poor. They always send the poor.
Fuck. It's pretty close to a perfect song, like in every regard, like lyrically, damn, the withering critiques and the well-placed criticisms and exposés in the track. I will say there's one layer of it I wasn't thinking about in advance, and the lies from the tablecloth, the manufacturing of consent, the fomenting a war or an acceptance of warfaring by, you know, casting other governments or indeed entire countries and even the populaces within them in an unflattering and homogeneous light, the suggestion of humanitarian intervention, some combination thereof, you know, toppling governments that are hostile with the idea that somehow we'll be doing these other people a favor, calling upon national pride and, you know, sort of ramping up domestic production and industry in the process, and oftentimes it's a combination of all these things, but again, beating the drum of war through editorials, through, you know, government executive statements and so on, and thus laying the groundwork for getting an entire nation state and its young men maybe in particular to serve as pawns in these larger forces, and again to cause destruction, exploitation, and, you know, corporate enrichment at the expense of humanity in many places around the world. So that is a crucial angle that I wasn't thinking about in advance. But again, lyrically, it's just wicked and spot on. Sonically, just incredible, the intensity. But the chorus, it really has this like smooth, almost like R&B style quality. I don't know quite how to describe it, but we still have the intense guitars, but the singing and the vibe of those parts where we're talking about everyone, you know, coming to the party, having a good time, blowing up the sunshine in the desert, which, you know, you can think of in terms of aerial bombardments and, you know, destruction of infrastructure and so on. It really does have this like heavy metal meets R&B quality. I love the intense and fast singing, and it's interesting to me because we, I think, get two vocalists here. Serge is the one who I think was, for the most part, their lead vocalist, but I forget the other guy's name. We hear him a lot here too, and his vocals are as passionate as anything. So yes, ultimately, sonically and vocally and chronologically, just the way the track plays out, brilliant. It's perfect. It's, every bit as good as Toxicity, even if for one reason or another, just sort of the, idiosyncratic way that their songs hit my brain and maybe the order in which I heard them, Toxicity might always hold that top spot, but this is like right there on the same level. So yes, an absolutely brilliant tune. Ultimately, I don't think they're around anymore, and I think there was a bit of like internal dissension. I think Serge has, let's say, very progressive values. I think the drummer is sort of on the other end of the spectrum, and so I remember reading an interview with Serge in recent years where he was saying like a reunion was probably unlikely because like even though they'll always be band brothers, like the internal personal politics, they didn't see eye to eye anymore, and so I think there was not a great possibility that they might continue, which again, I get that. Like in any band, it's different personalities, maybe they have different perspectives, and for a lot of bands, they exist for sort of these ephemeral moments in time. The rare few bands are able to keep a steady membership and continue for decades. I'm thinking of a band like, U2 or Depeche Mode and so on, but most bands are on the other end of the spectrum. They either have a revolving door of membership or they have a pretty short duration. I think System of a Down is somewhere in between. I think they were around, maybe a couple decades, but haven't like recorded a new album in a while. So ultimately, the legacy they have left, I think, is great. To be fair, not every one of their tunes hits my brain in the way that this one or Toxicity does. There's a few, like what's the one? I forget what it's called. It's not kombucha mushroom people. That's like the phrase that they keep saying in that track. I think that track is good. I don't think it's on the level of B.Y.O.B or Toxicity or one or two others. So I like a number of their tunes exceptionally. I like some of their other tunes pretty well. And then there's a few that are maybe, passable or skippers for me, but ultimately I think that's just a product of the fact that when it comes to metal, my knowledge of the genre is much more limited compared to, say, punk rock or techno, so it might be due to my, lack of exposure relative to some other genres. Either way, I think they are a legendary band with some really incredible music, and this is one of the best examples of that. Once again, shout out to Kim for sharing this track, which I used to have in CD form, but unfortunately do not anymore. I also have Hypnotize, and I do actually have that disc, so maybe I'll start going through some tracks from Hypnotize, which again, I don't think was my favorite album. I think Toxicity was, though I don't actually have that on disc either, but yeah, at least I have Hypnotize. We can go through some of those tunes. Let me know what you think of this. I will see you next time. Peace.